On my 72nd birthday, my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "We didn't invite you. You need to leave." I left. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I drove home, made myself a cup of tea, and called my attorney first thing Monday morning. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got there. My son was born on a Tuesday in October, the kind of crisp fall morning where the light comes in sideways and makes everything look golden. I was 29 years old, and I remember thinking I had never loved anything the way I loved that baby. I raised him alone for the first 6 years, working as a bookkeeper for a small dental practice in Dayton, Ohio, clipping coupons and packing his lunch every single day, never missing one of his baseball games, not even the ones on weekday evenings when I had to leave work early and pray my boss didn't notice. When I remarried, my husband was a good man. Steady. He adopted my son without hesitation, and for a while we were a real family. My husband passed 11 years ago, heart attack, no warning, no goodbye, and after that it was just my son and me again. That bond, I thought, was unbreakable, forged in the early hard years, something no one could touch. I should have known better. He met his wife at a conference in Chicago. She was sharp, well-dressed, quick with a laugh that never quite reached her eyes. I tried to like her. I genuinely did. I bought her flowers when they announced their engagement. I offered to help pay for the wedding, not as a way to control anything just because that's what I do. I give. I always have. My own mother called it a gift and a curse, and she wasn't wrong. The wedding was beautiful. I sat in the front row and cried the good kind of tears. My son looked so handsome. I thought, okay, this is the next chapter. I can do this. The first year was fine. We did Sunday dinners twice a month. I babysat when they needed me, before the grandchildren came, just their dog, which I found endearing at the time. When they told me they were expecting, I drove an hour and a half to be there when they shared the news in person, because my daughter-in-law had asked me to, and I wanted to honor that. My granddaughter was born in March, then my grandson 18 months later. I was at the hospital for both of them. I held those babies like they were made of light. That's when things started shifting, slowly at first. The way water changes direction, you don't notice until the current is already pulling you somewhere else. The Sunday dinners became once a month, then every 6 weeks. Then, we'll reach out when we have a free weekend, Mum, which, as any mother knows, is a very gentle way of saying don't count on it. I started noticing that my calls to my son went to voicemail more often than not. He'd text back an hour later, just a few words, always a little formal, like he was writing to a colleague. I thought maybe he was stressed at work. He'd been promoted at his firm, and I knew the hours were brutal. But a voice inside me, quiet and persistent, kept asking, "Is it just work?" I mentioned it to my friend, my closest friend, who I've known since we were both young mothers, pushing strollers around the same park in 1987. She listened the way she always does, without judgment, and then she said, "Have you tried just showing up?" I told her that felt presumptuous. She said, "You're his mother. Nothing about loving your child is presumptuous." So when my birthday came around in September, and I hadn't heard from my son about any plans, I decided to drive up. I brought a dish, a sweet potato casserole, his favorite since he was 8 years old, and a small gift I'd wrapped carefully the night before. I wasn't trying to make a scene. I wasn't trying to demand anything. I just missed my son. I missed my grandchildren. I wanted to see their faces. I pulled into the driveway at noon. My grandson's little bicycle was propped against the porch. I could hear laughter through the front window, and something in my chest loosened just a little. They were home. They were happy. I would knock, we'd hug, maybe I'd stay for an hour. My daughter-in-law opened the door. The smile she'd been wearing, I could see the tail end of it, disappeared the moment she saw me. She looked at the casserole dish in my hands, then back at my face, and her expression went somewhere I'd never seen it go before. Flat. Cold. Decided. We didn't invite you, she said. You need to leave. I stood there on my own son's porch on my birthday, holding a sweet potato casserole, and I could not make my mouth form words. This is a private family day, she added. We have guests. I heard my son's voice somewhere inside the house, and then it stopped. He knew I was there. I know he knew. I said very quietly, I just wanted to see the children. She said that's not happening today, and she stepped back and closed the door. I stood on that porch for what felt like a long time, but was probably 30 seconds. Then I walked back to my car. I put the casserole on the passenger seat. I drove out of the neighborhood. I made it about 4 blocks before I had to pull over because I couldn't see the road anymore. I sat in a CVS parking lot and let myself cry for exactly 10 minutes. I timed it. My mother always said you're allowed to fall apart, just not forever. After 10 minutes, I dried my face, pulled back onto the road, and drove home. My son called that evening. I watched his name appear on my phone, and I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let it go again. He left a message that said, Mo, I'm sorry about today. Gwen didn't mean it's complicated. Can we talk? Complicated. That was the word he chose. I didn't call him back that night. I made myself dinner, watched the evening news, and went to bed. Sleep didn't come easily, but that's nothing new. The next morning, I called my friend and told her everything. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, What do you need right now? I said, I need to think clearly. She said, Then come over and I'll make coffee and we won't talk about it until you're ready. That's the kind of friend she is. Over coffee, I started to let myself look at things I haven't wanted to look at. Not just this birthday, all of it. The gradual pulling away, the Sunday dinners disappearing, the voicemails, the vague texts, the holidays that somehow kept coming with new reasons I wasn't needed. Christmas 2 years ago, when my daughter-in-law said they were doing something small, just the 4 of us. My granddaughter's 5th birthday party. We kept it low-key, just a few school friends. Didn't want to overwhelm her. My grandson's first T-ball game, I found out from a mutual family friend 3 weeks after it happened. And then something else surfaced, something I'd been pushing down for months. Last spring, my son had actually called, not texted, to ask if I could help them. His wife's business, a boutique she'd been running for 4 years, was struggling. They needed a cash infusion to keep it afloat. He asked if I could loan them $40,000. I am not a wealthy woman. I'm comfortable. I was careful with money my whole life, put aside a little every month, paid off my house, built a modest retirement fund. But $40,000 is not nothing. I told him I needed to think about it. He said he understood. 2 days later, my daughter-in-law called me herself, which almost never happened. She was warm in a way that felt new. She called me by the nickname only my family uses. She said she was so grateful that it would make such a difference that she couldn't do this without family support. I sent the money. Not as a loan, technically. We never signed anything, which I realize now was my mistake. I told myself it didn't matter. Family doesn't need contracts. The boutique closed anyway. 11 months later, I found out through her social media. I never saw the money again. My son never mentioned it. When I brought it up once, gently, he said, Mom, we're doing our best over here. Things have been really hard. And I let it go because I didn't want to make things harder. But sitting in my friend's kitchen that morning, for the first time, I let the whole picture come into focus. The money was gone. The access to my grandchildren was controlled and rationed. I had been invited in when I was useful and turned away when I was inconvenient. And my son, who I had packed lunches for and stayed up with through fevers and worked overtime to put through school, had stood somewhere inside that house while his wife sent me away and said nothing. That hurt more than anything else, more than the closed door, more than the lost 40,000. That silence was the thing I kept coming back to. I called my attorney that Monday. His name is familiar to me. I'd used him for my husband's estate years ago, and I'd always kept the relationship current. I made an appointment and told him I wanted to review my estate documents, that I was considering some changes. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He's a practical man. We sat down that Thursday and I told him what I wanted to do. My existing will had been straightforward: the house, my retirement accounts, my savings, most of it to my son, with a portion set aside for each grandchild's education trust. I had also listed my son as my healthcare proxy and the executor of my estate. I changed all of it. My son was removed as executor. My friends stepped into that role. For my grandchildren, and this was the part I thought about hardest, I did not cut them out. They didn't do anything wrong. They are 7 and 5 years old, and they love me when they're allowed to. So I kept their education trusts, but I restructured them. The funds are managed by an independent trustee, a professional my attorney recommended, and can only be accessed for direct educational expenses, tuition, books, school fees, not by their parents. Not for anything else. My grandchildren will have what I intended for them. Their parents won't be able to touch it. The rest, the house, the savings, my husband's small life insurance policy that I'd never cashed in, I redirected. Half to a literacy program in Dayton that I volunteered with for 12 years, half to a hospice organisation that cared for my mother in her final weeks with such tenderness that I have never forgotten it. My son would receive nothing. That sounds harsh when I write it. Part of me still flinches. But I kept coming back to one moment, replaying it like a film on a loop. Me on that porch, on my birthday, holding a dish I made with my hands, and a door closing in my face while my son said nothing from inside. You show me who you are eventually. Everyone does. I signed the documents on a Friday afternoon in late October. My attorney's receptionist offered me a glass of water and I said no thank you, and then I walked out into a day that was cold and bright and smelled like leaves. I sat in my car for a minute and waited to feel something dramatic, regret maybe, or relief. What I felt was calm. My son called several more times over the following weeks. I answered once. He said he was sorry about my birthday and that things had been tense at home and that he wanted to find a way forward. I told him I appreciated that. I told him I loved him. Because I do. That doesn't just turn off, but that I needed time and that I was no longer willing to accept being treated as optional. He was quiet for a moment and then he said he understood. I don't know if he meant it. I don't know what his wife has told him or what version of me he believes. I stopped trying to manage his perception of me. That's new. It's also a relief I didn't expect. My daughter-in-law has not contacted me. In the months since, I have done things I kept putting off. I signed up for a watercolour class at the community centre, something I'd been saying I would do someday for 20 years. Someday turned out to be a Tuesday in November. The class is full of women around my age, and we drink coffee out of paper cups and make genuinely terrible paintings and laugh about them, and it is one of the highlights of my week. I started walking every morning, 3 miles, rain or shine, with a neighbour who lost her husband 2 years ago and needed someone to walk with. We don't always talk. Sometimes we just walk and listen to the birds and let the morning be quiet. I saw my grandchildren once in December when my son arranged a brief visit without his wife. The children ran to me the way small children do, all noise and energy and no self-consciousness, and my grandson climbed into my lap with his shoes on and my granddaughter showed me a drawing she'd made of a horse that she said was named Grandma's Horse for reasons she couldn't fully explain. I held both of them for as long as they let me. I cried in the car again on the way home, but different tears this time. I'm not going to tell you the ending is perfect, it isn't. My son and I are in a strange and careful place, something that might grow into something real, or might not. I've stopped predicting. What I know is that I am no longer organising my life around being available for people who treat that availability as a given. I turned 73 this past September. My friend took me to dinner at a restaurant I'd never been to, the kind with cloth napkins and a menu you actually have to study. We had wine and something with mushrooms, and we talked until they started stacking chairs around us. On the drive home, she said, "You look different than you did last year." I asked her what she meant. She thought about it and said, "Lighter." She wasn't wrong. There is a particular weight that comes from waiting to be chosen by people who keep not choosing you. I didn't know how heavy it was until I set it down. I still make the sweet potato casserole sometimes. I bring it to my watercolor class or to my neighbor on our walking days. People who are happy to see me coming. People who open the door wide. That is enough. Actually, it is more than enough. It turns out that is exactly what I needed all along. I keep thinking about the sweet potato casserole sitting on my passenger seat that afternoon. I'd made it the night before, the way I always do, peeled and boiled and mixed by hand, the way my mother taught me. I brought it to a door that didn't open for me, and for a long time after that I asked myself what I had done wrong. That's what we do, isn't it? When someone treats us poorly, we turn the mirror on ourselves first. I spent weeks going back through years of memories, looking for the place where I went wrong, where I was too much or not enough, where I gave in a way that invited being taken from. I found some things. I was too quick to say yes. I let $40,000 leave my hands without a single piece of paper to show for it. I kept quiet when quiet was a form of permission. But here's what I also found. I had been a good mother. Not perfect, nobody is, but genuinely, consistently good. I showed up. I gave without keeping score, which was the right instinct, even if I applied it to the wrong people. The problem was never my generosity. The problem was that I'd aimed it at people who had already decided I was a resource, not a person. That distinction matters. It took me a long time to understand it, but once I did, it changed the way I saw everything. What happened on my birthday was not random. Gwen didn't suddenly become someone who would close a door in her mother-in-law's face. People like that build toward those moments quietly, over years, through small dismissals, through tests of what you'll accept, through watching to see how much they can take before you push back. I had failed every one of those tests by not pushing back. My silence, my patience, my willingness to make excuses, all of it had taught her that there were no consequences. When I finally walked into my attorney's office, I was not acting out of spite. I want to be clear about that. I was acting out of clarity. For the first time in years, I was seeing my situation without the fog of hope and guilt and the particular blindness that comes from loving someone who is using you. I made decisions from that clear place, and I have not regretted them. What I learned, what I am still learning, is that decency is not weakness, but it requires wisdom to be anything other than a liability. Being a good person means something. It has value. But goodness without judgment is just availability, and availability without limits is just an invitation to be taken for granted. I had all the right values in the wrong configuration. The courage it took to finally act, to walk into that office, to sign those papers, to stop answering the phone out of guilt. That courage was always in me. I just hadn't needed it before. My grandchildren will have their education funds waiting for them when they're ready. That matters to me. It's the clearest expression of what I actually believe. That love is specific and intentional, and sometimes it means protecting the people you love from the consequences of their parents' choices. I am 73 years old. I paint badly on Tuesday mornings and walk 3 miles in the early light and bring casserole to people who are glad to see me coming. That is not a consolation prize. That is a life built on purpose by someone who finally decided she was worth building one for.